Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? This is my review of State of Fear by Michael Crichton. I'm going to I'm going to review slash cover this one and also Next, which was his final novel before he died. Because I've got not really like say a thesis, but just an observation. Uh, this came up in the comments for my Pirate Latitudes review last week, and I figured I would expound on it a little bit here. Towards the end of his publishing career, towards the end of his life, Michael Crichton started making decisions with his storytelling, we'll say, that were not as good as his previous works. When he first started out publishing, it was when he was in med school, and this was at a time when you could publish medical thrillers to pay your way through school. Now it's like, imagine being able to write novels and make money off of them enough to fund medical school. It boggles the mind. Those ones are lesser known. They were mostly published under a pen name. Some of them were just cheap thrillers, and then I think the first one under his main name was A Case of Need, which I still have not read. And then he started getting into the adventurous sci-fi that he's known for. Congo, Sphere, Jurassic Park. The last really sensational piece of hard sci-fi that he published, I want to say, was probably Timeline in the late 90s. And then in the early 2000s, let's see, Prey came out in 2003. And I need to reread that one before I cover it. That one's about nanotech. State of Fear came out in 2004, and the Next came out in 2006. And compared to his heyday style works in the 80s and 90s, these ones were we'll say a lesson in diminishing returns. State of Fear, specifically, is about eco-terrorists who team up with NGOs and the EPA, well, we'll say environmentalist groups that sue the EPA just to get money every year, and media complexes that are all working together to generate false flags and create sociological shifts through climate change alarmism. Of course, back in 2004, they were still referring to it as global warming, but then the branding had to change, and now they're just calling it general climate change. Like anything that happens in the climate, they say, we got to tax the hell out of everything, and you've got to give up any modern convenience that you have. There's a cluster of characters here in different areas, mainly just so that he can walk you through the various facets of the developed world where all this stuff plays out. There's an actor who is more or less Martin Sheen's character from The West Wing. There's a guy who is super intelligent and just knows everything and has references and gets in arguments with people all the time. And then there's a couple of adventurous mercenary types that are going around the world triggering events using advanced technology and then blaming it on global warming. Causing glaciers to explode, causing lightning storms out in the desert, and things of that nature. When I read this in 2006, I was a much more politically combative creature than I am now. And on the one hand, it was nice to see a little bit of pushback in the entertainment sphere from the other side, we'll say. This was a very counterculture, counter-narrative type novel because all of the popular entertainment platforms were really on board with the global warming narrative, and this is one that pushed back against it. That said, in retrospect, it's still the kind of book, the kind of creative composition that I don't care for, simply because it's a political argument masquerading as entertainment. While Michael Crichton's books do tend to be informative and educational, he's known for breaking down complex science in an entertainment space, and he always says in the afterword, he's like, if I got anything wrong, that's on me. Here are the sources that I studied to come up with this book. He's always been very diligent about that. This is one of his books that does contain more, what's the right word here? Just, we'll say, political arguments. But it did break down a very prevalent idea at the time and say, like, this is actually what's going on here. This is why this narrative is being pushed. This is why green technologies are being pushed. It's all in the name of expanding government power and making the population a lot more docile and receptive to accepting that power. Saying, oh, well, the world's going to be destroyed unless you limit yourselves technologically to this, 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 and this, and put these people in charge, and that will solve everything. Which has really been, for lack of a better term, the right's pushback against the catastrophic climate change narrative over the decades. The issue is always more complex than that. I would recommend starting with the writings of Swedish statistician Bjorn Lomborg, who branded himself in the 90s as the skeptical environmentalist, a guy who is still environmentally minded, but takes a very practical approach to the proposed solutions and saying, well, here's what we know about this industry and this technology and this proposition. Here's what would work and here's what wouldn't and here's what it would cause instead, and is this actually effective? He takes an objective perspective of these things. It's an issue that's more complex than can be addressed in a single book. And while Crichton still overall is able to put together a more or less cohesive and entertaining piece of sci-fi, it is still largely a political book. And there are random asides here and there where it's a novel where a guy's having an argument with himself. And, obviously me being more on the right side of the spectrum, I hate that when it pops up from the left, and I just kind of roll my eyes at it when it pops up from the right. People pick up novels so that they can read novels. People don't pick up novels so that they can read didactics and dissertations. And although it is more bothersome to me when it comes from the other side of the aisle, this type of book is still this type of book, and that's why it was received the way that it was. I mean, the Rush Limbaughs of the world praised it because, hey, like, our side finally got one. But it was a proto-example of the culture war that we're in now. You see this play out a lot in comic books. I mean, you've got the people either on the periphery or in the middle that say, we just want great comic books, and then you've got the political ideologues who put comic book fan masks on and say comics should be this or comics should be that, and they're using comics as a tug of war, a rope and a tug of war to say, like, oh, it belongs over here, it belongs over there, and like the actual comic book fans who want to spend money on comic books are saying, like, how about it's just neither of those things, and it's art for the sake of great art. Same thing with novels. Ultimately, in the end, I did enjoy State of Fear when I read it, and if you're going to get into it for the science and the didactics, it's at least a good starting point for the, we'll say, intellectually objective person to say, okay, I want to take this idea and study it further. What are some other sources that I can read up on and go from there? It puts all of that at least in one place where you can start addressing it through a broader array of sources. Another thing about that is kind of characteristic of the later works of Crichton is that he did get a lot more graphic with language and sex, and that played a role in this one. If I remember right, like the opening chapters of this book started out with a guy getting honey potted on a date and ends up doing the hibbity-dibbity with a chick who was like actually targeting him to assassinate him because of some lab work that he was doing, testing tidal models for some agency in France. Anyway, it's worth a read if this subject matter is of interest to you. I think your overall enjoyment of it is going to depend largely on which side of the spectrum you land, politically speaking. But it's just indicative of a trend that his later works took toward the end of his life. And I remain firm in my assertment, the thing that I said, about the 80s and 90s really being the heyday for his most spectacular and innovative works. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. Drive safe. See you out there.